The morning David walked out of that hospital room, I knew my life was over. Not in the dramatic way people mean when they lose their phone or miss a promotion. I mean truly, irrevocably over. Everything I had built, every lie I had told myself to justify what I'd done, came crashing down with the sound of his footsteps walking away from me and the baby. I should have known this day would come. For months I had lived in a bubble of denial, convincing myself that what happened with Simon meant nothing, that David would never find out, that even if he did, he would understand. After all, he was gone so much. Didn't I deserve to feel wanted? Didn't I deserve someone who was actually there? Looking back now, 3 years later, I can see how pathetic those justifications were. But at the time, they felt like lifelines keeping me afloat in an ocean of my own making. It started so innocently. Simon Adams was just another manager at the consulting firm where I worked. Charming, sure, but I'd dealt with charming men before. I was married, happily I thought, to David. We had been together for 6 years, building a life that looked perfect from the outside. David worked offshore on oil rigs, which meant long stretches away, but the money was good, and we were saving for our future family. The loneliness crept in slowly. At first it was just missing having someone to talk to at dinner. Then it was the empty bed, the quiet weekends, the couples events where I showed up alone while David was on a rig somewhere in the Gulf. I threw myself into work to fill the void, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects. That's how it started with Simon. Late nights at the office, reviewing presentations, grabbing quick dinners when we worked past 7. He was going through a breakup, or so he said, and we commiserated over wine and spreadsheets. He listened when I complained about David being gone. He laughed at my jokes. He was there. The first time he kissed me, I pushed him away. I was married, I told him. I loved my husband. But Simon had a way of making you feel like you were the only woman in the world. He didn't push after that first rejection. Instead, he became even more attentive, more present. When David called from the rig, exhausted and distracted, Simon would be texting me funny memes or asking about my day. I held out for 2 months before I gave in. 2 months of fighting an attraction that felt like gravity. When I finally let him kiss me again, in his apartment after another late night, I told myself it was just once, just this kiss. But one kiss became 2, became clothes on his bedroom floor, became a full-blown affair that would destroy everything I claimed to value. The guilt was overwhelming at first. I would come home from Simon's apartment and scrub myself raw in the shower, as if I could wash away what I'd done. When David called, I could barely speak without my voice shaking. But Simon was like a drug. The attention, the desire, the thrill of being wanted so intensely. He made me feel 22 again, reckless and alive. We were careful, or so we thought. We never went to my house, never showed affection at work, never stayed overnight together. 3 or 4 evenings a week when David was offshore, I'd drive to Simon's apartment. We had a routine, a system. I even had a code word with my friend Lisa in case I needed an alibi, though I never used it. What I didn't know was that I was just one in a long line. Simon had perfected his routine with married women. The attention, the understanding about their absent husbands, the promises that it was just physical, just fun. He knew exactly what to say to make us feel special while keeping us at arm's length. He would tell me about his crazy ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept their breakup, how she would call him at odd hours. I actually felt sorry for him, offering comfort he expertly turned into physical intimacy. The manipulation was so smooth that I never saw it coming. There was one evening, about 3 months into our affair, when I almost ended it. David had surprised me by coming home a day early from the rig. I was at Simon's when he called from our house, wondering where I was. The panic that shot through me was like ice water in my veins. I made up a story about being at Lisa's, helping her with a crisis. David believed me. Of course he did. He trusted me completely. That night, as he held me in bed, telling me how much he'd missed me, I nearly confessed everything. But I was a coward. Instead, I held him tighter and promised myself I would end things with Simon. But I didn't. The moment David left for his next rotation, I was back at Simon's apartment. The guilt was easier to push down after that. I had already crossed the line, I reasoned. What difference did it make if I kept crossing it? 4 months into the affair, my period was late. I told myself it was stress. The double life was taking its toll, and my body was just reacting. But when the second week passed, I knew. The pregnancy test confirmed what my body had been trying to tell me. I was pregnant. The timing was a nightmare. David had been home the first week of July, and we had been intimate multiple times, but I had also been with Simon just before and after David's visit. There was no way to know for certain who the father was without a test, and that was a test I couldn't take without destroying my marriage. I told Simon first. We were in his apartment, and I just blurted it out between kisses. His face went through a series of expressions I'll never forget. Surprise, calculation, fear, and finally, cold determination. "It's not mine," he said flatly. "You were with your husband that week. It's his." "But what if it's not?" I asked, my voice small. "It is," he said firmly. "And even if there's a chance it's not, your husband will never know. You make sure of that." That was when I should have seen him for what he was. But I was pregnant, terrified, and desperate to believe that everything would work out. Simon ended things that night. He said it was too risky to continue, that I needed to focus on my marriage and the baby. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. The next few days were hell. I called in sick to work, unable to face anyone while my world was falling apart inside my head. When I finally told David about the pregnancy, his joy was like a knife to my heart. He spun me around in our kitchen, tears in his eyes, talking about names and nursery colors and how he was going to be the best dad in the world. I convinced myself he was right, that the baby was David's. It had to be. The timing worked out mostly. And David was so happy when I told him. He threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with an enthusiasm that broke my heart even as I smiled and played along. We painted the nursery together, picked out names, went to parenting classes. Every moment was tainted by my secret, but I pushed through, telling myself I was protecting him, protecting us. The pregnancy was difficult, not physically, but emotionally. Simon still worked at the same company, and seeing him every day was torture. He was professional, distant, as if we had never been more than colleagues. A few times he asked how I was feeling, mentioned that he hoped everything would work out. Once he even called to check on me, reminding me to keep our secret, as if I could forget. He had already moved on to someone new, so I heard through office gossip. Another married woman, another secret affair. I felt sick when I realized I had been nothing special to him, just another conquest in a long line. But by then it was too late. I was 7 months pregnant, and David was picking out strollers. When Melissa was born, she was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a full head of dark hair. David was supposed to be overjoyed. He had talked about this moment for months. But something was wrong. He stood at the edge of the room, watching but not engaging. He didn't hold her. He didn't even really look at her. "Honey, don't you want to hold your daughter?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the growing dread in my chest. That's when he said it. Those words that still echo in my nightmares. "I think we should wait for the DNA test results before I get too attached." The room froze. My mother gasped. David's mother looked like she'd been slapped. And I felt my carefully constructed world begin to crumble. I tried to deny it, to act shocked and hurt. How could he accuse me of such a thing? What kind of woman did he think I was? But David wasn't buying it. He was cold, methodical, laying out facts I didn't even know he knew. Simon had told another woman about us. That woman had told her husband. The dominoes had fallen, and now David knew everything. Well, almost everything. He knew about the affair, but he was still waiting for confirmation about Melissa's paternity. The conversation that followed was the worst of my life. David's mother and mine listened as he laid out my betrayal in clinical detail. 6 months of lies. 4 months before I got pregnant, 2 months after. He knew about the meetings at Simon's apartment, knew that Simon had ended things when I told him about the baby. He even knew Simon and I had discussed keeping it secret from him. What made it worse was the way he laid out exactly how he'd found out. Apparently, Simon had been bragging, using me and the other women as proof of his ability to keep secrets, convincing new conquests they could trust him. He'd given enough details that when one woman confessed to her husband, all the pieces fell into place. I wasn't just a cheater, I was a fool who'd fallen for the oldest tricks in the book. I tried to explain, to make him understand. I was lonely. He was gone so much. It didn't mean anything. All the pathetic excuses that cheaters use when they're caught. But the more I talked, the worse it got. When I let slip that Simon had called to check on me just the day before, I saw the last bit of love die in David's eyes. He left that day, packed his things while I was still in the hospital, and moved into an apartment he had already rented. He had known for over a week, and had spent that time planning his exit. The only reason he had stayed was to wait for Melissa to be born, to take the DNA test he had already arranged. My mother stayed with me, but the disappointment in her eyes was almost unbearable. She helped with Melissa, cooked meals, kept the house running while I fell apart, but she also made it clear that I had brought this on myself. "I raised you better than this," she said one night when Melissa was crying, and I was too. "That man loved you, and you threw it away for what? A few months of excitement?" The DNA results came back 2 days later. David didn't deliver them personally. He had my mother give them to me. The envelope might as well have weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside, in black and white, was the confirmation of what I had feared all along. David was not Melissa's father. Simon was. The divorce papers arrived the next morning. What followed was the complete destruction of my life as I knew it. David had been smart. He had protected his assets, paid off debts, consulted with a lawyer before I even knew he suspected anything. I got half of our shared property, which was fair legally but felt like a punishment. The house we had built together was sold. The nursery David had painted with such care went to strangers. But the financial loss was nothing compared to the social devastation. Word spread quickly in our small city. David, Steve, Larry, and Dawn all betrayed husbands, made sure everyone knew exactly what Simon had done and who had fallen for his charms. I became a pariah overnight. Friends stopped returning my calls, invitations dried up. At work, people whispered when I walked by. Even my childhood friends distanced themselves. Julia, who had been my maid of honor, told me she couldn't trust me around her husband. "If you could do that to David, what else are you capable of?" she asked. The worst part was that I couldn't argue with her logic. Simon, of course, wanted nothing to do with Melissa or me. When I contacted him about child support, he laughed. "Prove it," he said. "Take me to court if you want, but I'll fight it every step of the way." The legal battle that followed drained what little savings I had left. Simon had resources and no shame about using them. He demanded paternity tests, psychological evaluations, anything to delay and complicate the process. Meanwhile, he was dealing with similar suits from other women. Turns out I wasn't the only one who had believed his lies. During one court appearance, I saw 2 other women there for the same reason. We made eye contact, recognizing the shared humiliation in each other's faces. One of them, Patricia, approached me in the hallway. "Tuesday and Thursday evenings?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Monday, Wednesday, Friday for me," she said with a bitter laugh. He had us on a schedule. Then came the morning Simon was found on the sidewalk outside his house. Someone had attacked him during his morning jog, leaving him with injuries that would affect him for the rest of his life. The police investigated, but with so many angry husbands and no evidence, the case went cold. When I heard about it, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just emptiness. I called David once, months after the divorce was finalized. My mother had pushed me to apologize properly, to try to make amends. He listened to my rambling apology in silence, then asked what exactly I was apologizing for. Was it for the affair? For getting pregnant? For lying? Or just for getting caught? I couldn't answer. The truth was, I was sorry for all of it and none of it. Sorry for hurting him, but still unable to fully accept responsibility. He must have sensed this because he cut me off mid-sentence. "You never even said you were sorry in the hospital," he said quietly. "You just made excuses. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry it didn't work out the way you planned." He was right. Even then, part of me was still justifying what I had done, still blaming his absence, my loneliness, anything but my own choices. When I asked if we could meet to talk, he said no. When I asked if he knew anything about what happened to Simon, he simply said Simon got what he deserved and hung up. That was the last time we spoke. I moved back in with my mother, unable to afford a place on my own while paying for lawyers and raising a baby. She helped, but the judgment never left her eyes. I was her daughter who had thrown away a good marriage for a workplace fling, the woman who had betrayed a man who loved her for one who saw her as just another conquest. Work became unbearable. The whispers, the looks, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. I eventually found another job, but the pay was less and the shame followed me. In a city this size, everyone knew someone who knew my story. I ran into David's friend Steve once at the pharmacy. Melissa was with me, fussing in her stroller. He looked at her, then at me, and shook his head. "She looks just like him," he said. I knew he didn't mean David. "How can you live with yourself?" he asked before walking away. I stood there in the baby aisle, holding diapers, and cried. Raising Melissa alone was harder than I ever imagined. Every milestone she hit was tinged with regret. Her first smile, first word, first steps, all witnessed by just my mother and me instead of the family I had planned. When she looked at me with those dark eyes, so much like Simon's, I saw my betrayal reflected back at me. I tried dating again after a year, but it was hopeless. Every man I met either knew my story or learned it soon enough. Who wants to date the woman who cheated on her husband, got pregnant by another man, and tried to pass the baby off as his? I was damaged goods in the most literal sense. One date actually went well until he Googled me and found a social media post about the Simon Adams scandal. He texted me to cancel our second date, saying he didn't date cheaters. The brutal honesty was almost refreshing compared to the others who just ghosted me. Meanwhile, through the grapevine, I heard about David's new life. He had taken a job at corporate headquarters, was seeing someone new. A woman named Lily who, according to mutual acquaintances, was everything I wasn't. Loyal, trustworthy, someone who appreciated what she had. They were building the life I had thrown away. I saw pictures on social media through mutual friends. David and Lily on vacation in places he'd promised to take me once we had saved enough. Their engagement announcement. The wedding I wasn't invited to but heard all about. The pregnancy announcement that came a year later. The life that should have been mine if I hadn't been so stupid, so selfish, so willing to throw it all away for a man who saw me as nothing more than a scheduling conflict to manage. The worst part was seeing the pity in people's eyes. Not sympathy for a woman whose marriage had ended, but pity for someone who had destroyed her own life so thoroughly. Mothers at the playground would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. Former friends would cross the street to avoid awkward conversations. Even my hairdresser, who had styled my hair for my wedding, could barely meet my eyes. Simon eventually paid child support, but only after a lengthy legal battle that cost more than I recovered. He never asked to see Melissa, never acknowledged her beyond the court-ordered payments. She was just another financial obligation to him, another consequence of his lifestyle that he handled with money rather than responsibility. As Melissa grew, people would comment on how much she looked like her father. They meant David, of course, not knowing the truth. I would smile and change the subject, but each comment was a knife to my heart. She would never know the man who had painted her nursery, who had read parenting books and assembled her crib with such care. Instead, she had a biological father who saw her as a mistake, and a mother who had destroyed her family before she was even born. I thought about reaching out to David again when Melissa turned 2. I had some fantasy that enough time had passed, that maybe he could forgive me, that we could try again. But then I saw him at the grocery store with Lily. They were laughing at something, his hand on her lower back in that protective way he used to touch me. He looked happy, really, truly happy in a way he hadn't looked in our last year together. He saw me too. For a moment our eyes met across the produce section. I saw recognition, maybe even a flicker of something else, but then his face closed off. He nodded politely, the way you would to a distant acquaintance, and guided Lily away. That small gesture, that polite dismissal, hurt more than any angry words could have. I watched them leave, Lily's pregnant belly visible under her sundress, David's hand gentle on her back as he helped her navigate the crowd. They were everything we should have been, everything I had thrown away for nothing. That night I finally broke down completely. Not the tears I had cried before, full of self-pity and frustration, but real, deep sobs of understanding. I had done this. Not David's absence, not Simon's charm, not loneliness or neglect. I had made choice after choice that led me to this moment, sitting in my childhood bedroom while my daughter slept in a crib bought from a second-hand store because I couldn't afford new furniture. My mother found me there, and for the first time since everything happened, she didn't lecture. She just held me while I cried, stroking my hair like she did when I was little. When I finally calmed down, she said something that changed everything. "You can't undo what you did," she said softly. "But you can decide who you're going to be from now on, for her." She nodded toward Melissa's room. "She didn't ask for any of this. You owe her better than what you've been giving." She was right. I had been so focused on what I had lost, on my own pain and shame, that I had forgotten the most important thing. I was a mother now. Melissa deserved better than a bitter, self-pitying mother trapped in the past. It wasn't easy changing my perspective. Therapy helped, though I could barely afford it. Learning to take real responsibility, not just mouth the words, but truly understand the pain I had caused. Understanding that David's absence didn't excuse my choices, that Simon's attention didn't justify my betrayal, that loneliness was not a license to destroy my marriage. The therapist made me write letters I would never send. One to David, taking full responsibility without excuses. One to Melissa, explaining why her life was different from other children's. One to myself, forgiving the woman I had been while promising to be better. That last one was the hardest to write. Slowly, painfully, I rebuilt. Not my old life, that was gone forever, but something new. I threw myself into being the best mother I could be. I found a better job, saved money, eventually moved into our own small apartment. I stopped hiding from the whispers and judgment, accepting them as consequences I had earned. I never remarried, a few relationships here and there, but nothing serious. How could I trust myself with someone else's heart when I had been so careless with David's? Besides, Melissa took all my energy and love. She was my redemption and my reminder, my greatest joy and my deepest regret, all rolled into one beautiful little girl. When Melissa asks about her father, I tell her age-appropriate truths. That her daddy loved her very much before she was born, but couldn't be part of our lives. That sometimes adults make mistakes that can't be fixed. That she is loved and wanted, even if our family looks different from others. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her the whole truth. About David, the man who should have been her father. About Simon, the man who is. About my choices and their consequences. I hope she'll understand, but more importantly, I hope she'll learn from my mistakes. I know David has moved on. He married Lily, and they have the family he always wanted. I hope they're happy. Sometimes I dream about the life we could have had, the parallel universe where I stayed faithful, where Melissa is his daughter, where that nursery he painted still shelters our child. But those dreams just bring pain now. The truth is, I got exactly what I deserved. Not because the universe is cruel, but because actions have consequences. I betrayed the best man I ever knew for a serial seducer who saw me as just another notch on his belt. I destroyed a good marriage for a few months of excitement. I cut my daughter off from the father who would have adored her, depriving her of a loving father before she was even born. Some mistakes you can fix, others you just have to live with. This is mine to carry, every single day for the rest of my life. When I see happy families at the park, when Melissa asks why she doesn't have a daddy like other kids, when I lie alone in bed remembering what it felt like to be loved and trusted, I carry the weight of what I destroyed. There's no redemption arc here, no happy ending where everyone forgives and forgets. Just the reality of a woman who had everything and threw it away for nothing. A cautionary tale about the cost of betrayal, the price of lies, and the weight of choices that can never be undone. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am the woman who destroyed my own life. This is my story, my confession, my warning to others who might be tempted to follow the same path. Don't. Whatever you think you're missing, whatever void you're trying to fill, it's not worth what you'll lose. Trust me, I know.